All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. Thank you for coming here at 10 a.m. on a Saturday to hear about security architecture. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Ryan Elkins. I'm a security architect just up the road in Indianapolis at Eli Lilly Pharmaceuticals. I've been actually an architect across the financial industry, the insurance industry, and now the pharmaceutical. So it's a lot of fun, and I love what I do, and I'm hoping that you guys can take away even small nuggets if you don't serve in an architect role. But a lot of the concepts, the topics cover a lot of different areas. So we're going to drive through a lot of content, and the slides will be available afterwards. So if there's anything I go too fast on, also catch me in the hallway afterwards. Talk to me. I love just talking security, as I think most of us in this room do. I also want to give a shout out. My son, who is 3, is watching the live stream, so he's going to hold me accountable for anything I say today. So if I get too far off base, he'll be the one that keeps tabs. So the agenda, we're going to really just talk about building a security architecture program that works and is effective, but not only effective for an enterprise corporate group, but really it could be within your red team or blue team or application security team. The goal is to make this fit within every domain that you may operate in. So to get started, it's essential to understand the signal in a world of noise. And what do I mean by that? Who here receives countless emails from vendors pretty much every single day in your inbox? And if I were to ask, what should I buy? This is basically what I would be told that I need to secure my company. Without a good strategy or an architecture, this is probably what I see that I want. And this is, as the keynote spoke about yesterday, shiny object syndrome. What looks fun to me? What do I want to dig in? So I start looking and I ask my management, what kind of budget do I have? What can we afford? I find out this is what I can buy. Does that resonate? All right. But your boss wants your program to look like this, or they expect it, or they think it looks like this. So how do you get from here to here effectively? What you really need is a strategy that kind of hits all of the domains. And I know this is a technology specific slide, but it really includes people, processing, and technology all at once working together. The biggest thing to understand is you can't buy security. If you could, I think a lot more of our problems would be solved. There's a lot of components that have to work together. So where do you start? Everything feeds off of risk, and it doesn't matter what you do. Everything should be risk driven from what we're looking at tackling and trying to accomplish. And you can see various approaches to risk there that I feel are very comparable to what we may see in our enterprises. So there's really 3 key things to start to look at before you start jumping in and building a program, and that's to look at your business and understand the impact. What will impact the bottom line the greatest? What's most critical to the business? Is it availability? Is it your customer records? Is it intellectual property? And how can these different areas be impacted? And those are kind of start your threat modeling at that point. The next thing you want to do is look at the news and understand the threat. If you see a data breach happen to a peer within your industry or another company or anything, you better know and be digging in what's going on. How did they get breached? Why did they get breached? And who was attacking them? And then the next thing to do is look at your own enterprise or company and see, are we susceptible to this same attack? And those are the questions that your leadership, your board, they have to answer to on a daily basis. So the better that you can have this information at hand to understand it and apply it will make you very successful. And then the third is looking at your program and really understanding your own exposure. It's not sweeping things under the rug, but it's actually tackling some of the difficult challenges that you may face and I feel like we're still at fundamentals in 2017 where we're still trying to tackle proper segmentation. We're trying to address administrative access. There's so many key concepts that we still fail at on a day-to-day basis. So how do we fix that? So you just realized you've done your assessment. The impact is your company will go out of business if you're breached. Your threat is our intellectual property is worth billions. Everyone wants it. And then your exposure is we think there are gaps, but we're not really sure. What do you do? There are options. So there is some good news to this. Your first option is you throw in the towel. We don't like that option. The second option, which I've seen a lot, is people burn out and then they change fields and they just want to get away from security. And it's really sad when that happens because it is such a great community, it's such a great field, and it's an area that I really enjoy and love. And I want to share that, and I'm glad to see younger members in the audience that are growing, and hopefully we'll get into this field very shortly, if not already. And the last thing we have options are we get a consulting job and we tell others how bad their security program is. Tell me that's not true. No, but we don't want to fail, and I didn't join security to fail. I want to be on a winning team. I don't want to lose. I'm competitive, and that's why I like security. We are going to be better, and that's what I want to convey through the messaging this morning. So there's really 3 modes of failure, and I like to take these into context of my own life, not just a security program, but just applying this to everything you do. The first failure mode is failure to see. It's not even looking at what's going on around you. It's living in tunnel vision, oblivious to change, oblivious to transformation, and just continuing to do without looking forward. The second failure mode is failure to act. So you may see what you need to do, but it's either too hard, too challenging, you don't have the support, you don't have the time, so it's failure to take action. And then the last and kind of the saddest is failure to finish. You get started on a project and then you jump up to the next thing, or you get pushed because of prioritize, and you really never complete that key thing that you're working on. So those are 3 failure modes that we want to build a strong architecture into to avoid. So what have I seen in the past? Why have I found that many architecture programs fail? Is anybody here in the room an architect? Or very good, we have a couple here. So the weird thing about security architecture versus an actual architect that builds buildings are, if you're going to build your house, one of the very first things you need is a blueprint diagram signed off by an architect before a builder will even consider it. Well, when you start talking security architecture, most people have built a product or built a company, and then they realize, well, first, I guess I need some security. Let's hire an operational team. And then down the road, we're running into some problems, or we're overspending, or we don't know what we need. We should probably look at the architecture. So architecture is more of from a security program building standpoint, it's usually later on because it is expensive. It takes time. And that makes it challenging because who wants to build something without designing it first and trying to come in as an architect, create change? And I say architect, but it could be an engineer, it's an analyst, it's anybody that has a part in this. So what you have to understand is this isn't traditional, we have this big architecture reference model that we're going to build on top of. We are coming in and we're being a transformational function, which is not easy. And I think that's something that we don't convey enough within our jobs of why it's so hard and difficult. As we go in, we get beat up often on trying to get things implemented, do this, but really the cart is already left, and we're coming in, we're trying to build in. So we have some architectural models, there's frameworks, there's SABSA, there's DODAP, there's TOGAP, there's MODAP, there's OSA, there's ZACMAN, there's CSA, there's you name it. Everyone thinks they have an answer, but what I found are those are so complex, you can't really, it's not adoptable. You can come in, show it on a display, a presentation, but to actually achieve that within the organization just doesn't work. So it has to be agile so you can support change. It has to be visionary to support the enterprise strategy, forward-looking, and then it has to be reasonable. And I think the key is reasonable. It has to support adoption. Otherwise, it's just going to get pushed to the wayside and it'll never be successful. So I'm going to talk through 5 phases of a control framework, and this is something that I'm working on too, trying to automate these entire phases. So there is some complexity still into here, but I think trying to break it down to what truly are you trying to accomplish through a program is key and critical to being successful. So if you don't have anything, or most places have a combination of this, but I call this kind of your control framework, your phase 1. This is figuring out what you have. If you have standards, if you have requirements, start piecing those together, put them in, just start with a spreadsheet, and you have, so this is your phase 1 controls, give it a reference ID so you can start references. If you say you need to do this, or you can't do this, or you have an exception, pull it back to this control, just start somewhere. And then the domain, and I love this because this works. I have a strong background in application security too, so I've done pen testing, source code reviews, everything. So I'm very familiar with trying to rewrite reports. I hate report writing, so the more that I can automate and do, I would be happy because I like doing the pen testing, not the report writing. So if you break it down, domain, category, description, status, domain, let's talk application security. Your domain could be input validation. Your category is SQL injection because of knowing, I mean, you start breaking it down into these concepts. If you look at it from an enterprise perspective, your domain could be identity access management, then it's authorization, then you have a subdomain, authentication, and then your description is that control. So what is it? You must have a password policy. You must do whitelisting on untrusted input. And then your status is, where is it at in the place? Because we don't want to look at our program and say, we don't have this, we're not going to capture it anywhere. So I recommend having kind of ranking your controls. So I would say have a core control, and that's what you've already implemented. That's your true requirements that are driven and people know they have to do. You may have something that I would just love to get implemented, but we're not there yet. Let's call that our emerging control. So that's potentially like a 1 to 2 to 3 year down the road, depending on your timeline, what you're talking about. And then you have an investigational control, and that's kind of your forward-looking, I'd like to get here, maybe 3 to 5 year roadmap. So now you're really starting to get something that a lot of security teams don't have, which is a forward-looking 5-year plan based on these rudimentary controls that you want to implement. So then next, you get your controls document. Now you want to start figuring out where you're at, starting to figure out that capability maturity model. What's the strength of my controls? Do I have them documented? If it is, let's give myself a point for that. Do I have it operational? Is it, whether manual or automated, who cares? It's in place, that's a point for that. Are we monitoring it? Monitoring is critical. You have to see what's going on. So if it's monitoring, great, I'm at a 3 now. And then governed, is it being audited? Do you know that it's actually occurring? Is it visible through metrics? And if so, give yourself a 4. So you have, at this point, you're at a reference ID. You have a point for just the control. You have documented, that's 2, operational 3, monitored 4, governed is 5 points. You're at a 5-point capability maturity model scale. If you've ever worked with like a big 4, that's typically what they go to. Now you're starting to build that in-house, and you're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to accomplish this. Phase 3 is now your measurement. Next time that you're asked by your manager, you need to start focusing on this, and you need to focus on that. The biggest question is, well, what are you pulling me away from? And usually we can't account for that or explain why. Well, now you can. Let's start assigning risks to each one of these individual control items that we have. So that way, if you start getting pulled in a different direction and you know that you're the identity access management expert, you can start to indicate there's this level of risk within these controls that I focus on. You know, if you pull me away, that's could be devastating to our strategy, to this. So you start assigning risk, give them 1 through 4, 1 through 5, and then your coverage is critical too, because a lot of technologies don't cover everywhere. So you want to give that if it's 80% coverage, and start, now you're truly starting to quantify risk through this very fundamental control model. Phase 4 is mapping. So now that you've kind of done your due diligence of what you have, let's look at what others have. So there's tons of frameworks out there. There's the NIST cybersecurity framework, there's ISO, there's the Cloud Security Alliance, there's, you name it, you can go and you can find good solid lists of controls. So now this is where you go back to your first phase 1, look at your reference IDs, figure out what controls you're missing from those industry leading standards, start throwing those into your catalog, map them there so you remember where they came from, and then stick those as emerging or investigational controls if you're not ready for them yet, but at least to get them on the roadmap pretty soon. Now you're starting to have a documented program that has, you can measure the strength, you can measure the risk, and then you also have this tied to your strategic timeline of where you're heading and where you can be in the future. And then the 5th one is metrics, and that's key, but that comes at a little later model because you have to get all of this in place before you can really demonstrate those. But the sooner you can demonstrate metrics sometimes helps you drive, so you don't want to wait too long to get there. So there's certain metrics that you can derive off of your phase 1, your phase 2, your phase 3. You don't have to have it all in place completely at once. So I call that architecture at scale, and what we just talked through is just the tip of the pyramid, but I feel like that's the most critical component you could implement across the company. Once you get those controls, now you're not making security calls yourself. You are actually doing risk-based decisions that you can drive stakeholders to say and to explain why you said you could do this or why you can't do this. You don't have to repeat yourself. You don't have to rewrite. Just direct them to this reference number of the control. This is why. Here's the risk we've associated. You want to have further conversation? If so, here's your risk acceptance process. Sign off, risk ID, stakeholder. Now the decisions are no longer on us. We have properly quantified the risk based on threat, based on the strength, and we've made the decision that we've been hired to do. Now we present that to the business, the stakeholders, and they can determine what impact that they want to agree to on it. So now we're no longer the bad guys. We're just supporting and being strong advisors through the organization through strong core foundation. What I like to do on the pyramid, though, is it doesn't stop there. So I like controls and standards. You kind of hear those interchangeable. How I like to approach it is a control is that key thing without the measurement. I like the standards being the measurement. So control is you need to have a password policy. A lot of people would say that's a policy statement too. However, but I like to use those as more broad. So then you can put standards assigned to those policies. So now you have privileged administrative accounts, you have customer accounts, you have internal accounts. Those all probably have slightly different password lengths, complexities, change requirements. So that's where you get to your standards. And you can drive standards off of data classification, handling, the exposure, the likelihood, whatever you determine. But that gives you some room then to kind of expand and have varying degrees of controls that you require. And then procedures. So how do you implement these is the next step. So every single control or standard you have, you should be starting to document how you can address this, because if it's not, as we talked about, security has to be adoptable, has to be usable. If we can't even write how to do this, we probably shouldn't be prescribing it, or we should look for an alternative mechanism. And then the cool thing is, once you have that, you have what's called the patterns. And these are quick ways to get pre-authorization, pre-approval. It's been vetted by security. You can move forward. So rather than hand this over to a developer or to a red team or a blue team or the business and say, here's 50 controls you have to adhere to for your new application. Well, no, let's hand them a pattern that addresses these 50 controls that we've already vetted and say, we already made the purchase, the central investment. This starts driving people to our central platforms for security, whether it's authentication, identity access management systems, platforms. And that's a fast way to really start getting value and building that coverage to 100% of your business rather than having the shadow ITs, the ad hocs, because we've already done the hard work for you. And then once you have patterns, build your service catalog. This should be what you're proud of. This is the deliverables that you can execute on, deliver in a small amount of time to your business. And it starts building up. It shows maturity, and it's exciting because these are what you can show and display and say, hey, for these additional capabilities, here's why we need more resources. And you can quantify that from end to end. And it's pretty cool. And then your principles, and these are just guiding statements, kind of your strategy. Once you look at your controls, your emerging investigational controls, that's really where you derive your principles from. And then policies are key because you really have to hold your users accountable. So this could be just a user acceptable use policy, sometimes a network policy. These are the high level ones, but from a legal perspective, ramifications, the policies still hold the strength because you do have the individual agreement that you're going to abide by the supporting control standards, procedures, patterns, service catalog, and principles that lead up to the policy. So now you have this pretty powerful pyramid of a program. So some example artifacts from that, you have your phase 1 control catalog. And at the conclusion of this, I don't have it quite ready for release, but I'm going to have a tool that automates this entire process for really, it's a CSV that you still have to fill out, but I have a website ready to go, and I'll demo that in a few minutes here. And my goal is to kind of establish these metrics based on these phase maturity models so that you can have real-time metrics all at once. So the spreadsheet may look something like this, and you just start filling it out. And spreadsheets, a lot of times people hate to hear, but they work, they're effective. And so that's a fast way to get started. You don't have to go out and buy a governance risk compliance tool, spend tons of money, just put it in a spreadsheet. And then do some cost benefit analysis. So part of that spreadsheet, and I haven't talked about, is if you start mapping your technologies that cover those individual controls, so you have this big control catalog, determine which technology is covering that. Now you can start finding the value or the overlap in your technologies. You may be spending $80,000 a year on a technology that's only covering 3 controls that you've ranked with a risk rating of low. That's not very good use of your spend. You might have another technology you're spending $40,000 a year on that covers 80% of your control library, and it captures the highest risk elements of the enterprise. And so that really gets focused too and can drive your technology to better spend so that we don't have the concept of shelfware, which we hear often, very often. So that makes management and leadership happy. And then establishing your target goals. And this is a matrix I'll show with the automation platform I'm working on trying to process. So it'll process the CSV file and really get your maturity rankings. I'll show you this more in a minute. So the keys are capturing your program weaknesses. Then you want to plan for the needed capabilities. distribute the strategy. So make it known. And this is something that I know Jason prior to this talked about: red team, blue team, purple team. That was really good information. And one of the key things you talked about is silos within your information security department. And I feel like that happens way too much. And I love the concept that he has of advisors going around, sitting on teams, talking about the various domains that and influencing, making sure that we're all on the same page, because that's so key too. We shouldn't have an access management strategy. We shouldn't have a security incident response strategy. We should have single strategies that we're all familiar with, that focus on those areas, but kind of tie up to the enterprise the entire team is working towards to be successful. So you put it together, and we kind of just talked about putting it together. I'm gonna show what I've been working on, and it's not quite ready for release, but it's going to be available in securitymarker.io, and you have all my contact information. I'll probably publicize it out on Twitter as soon as I get it loaded, ready to go. But what I'm going to start doing are putting some mechanisms in place. Let's slide this over. Because what I hate doing is, especially as an architect, I don't like doing anything twice. So if I ever have to generate a graph or anything in Excel and it just gives that point in time, I don't want that. So what I'm working on doing is creating this platform, and it'll be available. I'll make sure it's out on GitHub and fully usable. It's about the simplest code ever behind it, but it's using the D3 JavaScript library for visualizations, which is really cool. And I haven't dug into it a whole lot yet, but I'm really excited to dig in. And what this will do is it'll take a comma separated value spreadsheet or list. So I'll pull that up.
Looks like a kiwi.
Yeah, it does actually. Oh, yeah, I'll explain that in a second here too. So this looks a little bit overwhelming, but this was just a quick run through that I filled in using the NIST cybersecurity framework because it's just freely available out there. So I just copied the information in there, started filling out your reference IDs, your core domain, your core categories, your core controls, and then I started listing. So what's the status of them? Are they in place? Are they emerging? Are they investigational? What's the risk? What coverage do we have? And then the strengths. So is it implemented? Is it documented? Is it operational? Is it monitored? And then some additional enhancements that I'm going to be working on too are releasing the additional metrics around their technology cost benefit analysis, the overall risk of the controls, and some different variations. But what this will do is this spreadsheet you see right here, I'm going to open up the website. This is just local to my computer right now. I'm going to go choose a file. Here's my control CSV file. I'm going to open it. The best part about this is thinking in terms of threat. Yeah, this is on a website. Your company is never going to allow you to post this onto the website to actually load because this has my sensitive information. Well, the cool thing about this is 100% driven JavaScript, client-side driven. So every calculation is driven on your computer. So when you hit choose file, it's just processing local to your browser. There's nothing being sent up to the server, and the source code will be out there so you can vet it, validate, do whatever. But that was kind of the big part too. So now I can have this website running that has the tools on here and never collect any information or data from anyone's company, so it's freely available to do and you leverage. So you load your site and you hit generate charts. And unfortunately I only have this one chart running right now, but what this does is it captures where you're at currently. So this is taking every one of those subdomains, maps it based on the risk, does the calculation of the controls in terms of its risk and the exposure times the strength of that control, so the document is operational, puts that into and kind of gives you that spider chart, which you've seen people pay $100,000 a year on assessments from the Big Four to give you that same thing. And then the orange is kind of your emerging, and that's showing where you want to be in the next 1 to 3 years. And then your green will be the investigational, and that's if you execute on your strategy, on your vision for 5 years, this is where you can be from a maturity model. And so all you have to do is really now just maintain that spreadsheet. Anytime you implement a new control, just reload it, take some screenshots. Here's your graph, share it. Yes?
Oh, sorry, real quick. So on the response planning, with that one spiking out towards that way, what does that mean? What is that saying for
That is saying that it has, all those dots are in the same place, meaning that there's no emerging or investigational controls for response planning. So that's something that I don't have in my future strategy. And these are all arbitrary values I threw in.
Sure.
So that's what that would mean. If you don't see that, it shows that you have nothing on the roadmap, no emerging. So it's going back to your key emerging controls. What are you trying to accomplish? So that's why that would not show. Now, some of these areas, they're primarily emerging or investigational for mitigation. That's something we're working on. That's kind of the story you can tell through your management leadership through that. And then I'm hoping to add some additional graphs in the coming weeks on the risk measurements and bar charts and I'll throw it out on GitHub. It'll be all, and since it's all client side, you can see the code, see the calculation, and you can adjust it, run it yourself, but it's just a couple files, and that's about the extent.
One more question. So related to the 1 through 5, that's mapping back to the levels of
maturity. Yeah. Yep. So what it has is the maturity adds up, and then the risk brings you down. So it's all based on a 5 scale. So that's all I had. I think my time is up. So feel free to catch me with any questions, concerns, anything afterwards. I'm on Twitter. Send me an email or find me in the hallway. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.